Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Welcome to the Rediscovery Channel. This is a channel where I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person usually doesn't know about and often hasn't heard about. Today, however, I'm going to be talking about the history of Mars. So the last video that I did on this topic, we addressed the ancient history of Mars, how it was perceived and dealt with in the ancient world. And now what we're going to talk about is the modern history of Mars. I saw it as a logical breaking point because in the ancient world, most people were operating under a geocentric cosmology, and very few cultures perceived of the planets as other worlds which you could physically step foot on. And to me, the biggest change that I've noticed is the abolition of the geocentric cosmology. And after that was done, people realized that, the other planets are actually worlds and we could potentially go to them. So if you're just tuning in for the first time, you don't have to necessarily look at the previous video to understand this. But what I'm going to say is I've noticed that throughout history, there's basically three periods or three different ways in which Mars was perceived. So in the ancient world, it was perceived as having supernatural qualities and being alive to some extent. And in the modern period, for a while, it was perceived as being a world which is home to life. And then the third phase, which is where we are right now in the 21st century, is the idea that Mars used to be, that it's a dead world, but it used to be the home to life. So today we're going to talk about all the modern views. And this is coming during the 1400s and 1500s. The Ptolemaic cosmology was refuted, and astronomers around the world began to realize that, okay, we live in a heliocentric universe. So now let's move on to the phase of, from there, from realizing that Mars was another world, then the next people began to speculate, like the next phase of speculation was, what kind of world is it? And does anybody live there? So the idea that Mars was an inhabited planet began with a guy named Giovanni Schiaparelli. So in 1877, there was an Italian astronomer, Giovanni Schiaparelli, who observed that there were lines running across the surface of Mars. He saw this through his telescope. And what he assumed is that these lines are waterways. And he published a map of Mars depicting these waterways. And when he published his views, his theories, his observations, the word that he used to describe these things was canali, which is an Italian word. Now, at the time that he was conducting his observation, the prevailing theory about Mars is that the lighter parts of the surface were land and that the darker parts were seas. And so he assumed that, these canals, he thought this was, the word he used was canali, and he thought that these are what is distributing water across the surface of the planet. Now, he didn't say and probably didn't think that these things were man-made, but the word canali was translated into English as canal. Now, the way that they should have translated it was channel. Like a channel could be either a natural waterway or an unnatural man-made waterway, but a canal is always, in the English language, it's always an artificial waterway that's dug. So because of how they translated it, that made people immediately assume, somebody must have been there to dig those things. So they just took it for granted that these are artificial waterways, and somebody must have dug them. Now, the guy that really popularized this idea was Percival Lowell, who was an American, and he lived from 1855 to 1916. So he saw the translation of Giovanni Schiaparelli's work and immediately started speculating about what kind of life was on Mars. And he created his own observatory in 1864 in Flagstaff, Arizona, which was called the Lowell Observatory, on Mars Hill. And he also started sketching what he saw through his telescope. So he claimed that there were canals and oases on Mars. And he said the canals were deliberately dug by a more advanced civilization to irrigate the planet by bringing water from the poles. And the reason that the people of Mars were doing this is because their planet was dying. Think about like Africa, how the Sahara is growing, right? It's called desertification, where good land is turned into a desert. So Percival Lowell, he thought that Mars was undergoing desertification on a global scale, and that the people there were trying to compensate for it. So he delivered lectures on the canals and the civilization which supposedly built them, and published his theories in 3 books. And if anybody's interested, those books are Mars, written in 1895, Mars and Its Canals, published in 1906, and Mars as the Abode of Life, which was published in 1908. So we're looking at like early 20th century for the most part. And Percival Lowell is the main source of the idea that Mars is a dying planet and a home to an advanced civilization who's trying to compensate for it. So his ideas were actually not very popular with the scientific community, but they were extremely popular with regular people, and particularly fiction writers. And what I want to... Yeah, I'm sure...
No, I just want to say, because I've been reading some German science fiction, which I can actually recommend, called the Perry Rhodan books. Have you heard about those before?
I have not.
Okay, well, I can really recommend them. I think you would like them. But they were written in the 60s, early 60s. And anyway, at some point they become interplanetary, even interstellar. But they go out to Venus, and they think there's like this jungle on Venus. It turns out that even like, I was just, it's like, well, wait, did people really think in the 60s that Venus was inhabited? And yeah, turns out a lot of people thought that this was a possibility. So that's not that long ago. So anyway, but you're in the 1900s, right? That's where when you're talking, or 1920s.
Yeah, late 1800s and early 1900s.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah, what you said about Venus, I've also noticed, like, they used to think Venus was a tropical rainforest type of place.
Yeah, with like dinosaurs and stuff.
Yeah, and there's lots of stories written about that, and I've read a few and watched a few. Of course, Venus is the Roman goddess of love, I think. And, these old pulp fiction type stories from the early 1900s, which I have a few, they have this idea of like very attractive women there, well endowed and not wearing much clothes, that kind of thing. And, now that you mentioned that, maybe I should do another one of these things for Venus. But I want to actually mention some fiction that was inspired by Percival Lowell's ideas. It sounds like you've read some. So these are some books that I've read. The first one I want to mention is The War of the Worlds, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yeah, I've read that one.
Oh, okay, great.
So I've maybe I read it as well, but I'm aware of it. So yeah, go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, I read it as well. I read an abridged
Yeah.
version of it when I was in 6th grade, and then I read the full version of it when I was in my 30s. The proper
Yeah, I think I
original
read it
version.
in English class at some point, so a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't supposed to read it for school, but it was there on the shelf, and so I took it and read it probably when I was supposed to be doing math or something. But basically, that book was published in 1897 by H.G. Wells, and in that version, I mean, you probably know this, but in the War of the Worlds, Mars is a dying planet, and the native of Mars, the natives, they basically decide to move to Earth, to relocate to Earth because their world is dying. And then when they get here, they immediately attack the humans, and they actually feed on humans, sucking the blood or the juices out of them through some kind of straw-like thing. And they're like these hideous cephalopod things with beaks. Um, and there's a humanoid life that's on Mars in that story, which they actually use as a food source. So when they come to Earth, they see humans as a food source as well. Um, and of course, that's a view of Mars again. It's heavily stems from Percival Lowell, but it also gets back to the ancient world as Mars being a place of aggression, a source of aggression and violence, right?
Mhm.
And so Herbert George Wells lived 1866 to 1964. And then the next book I wanted to mention was the next author is Edgar Rice Burroughs, who's one of my all-time favorite authors. And in 1912, he wrote Under the Moons of Mars, which he published in serialized form, and later it was released in book form as Princess of Mars. That was released in 1917. So, if you haven't read that, I highly recommend it. In Edgar Rice Burroughs' version of Mars, it's a dying world, and it's home to multiple sentient species. There's humanoids, which are broken down into different races, and then there's non-humanoids, like these big green guys with multiple arms, and then there's some other species as well. And the
There's a
humanoid,
movie based on this, right?
yeah, I think Disney, they released a movie, and they did a pretty good job with the visuals, but of course they kind of played fast and loose with the story, bringing their own ideas to it. And
Yeah, I enjoyed it, though. I never read the books, but I enjoyed the movie.
yeah,
Yeah.
I tolerated the movie. I like the visuals of it. It's not as good of an adaptation as like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings was, which is also flawed. But yeah,
Well, there's something about the visuals of Mars that speaks to the imagination, right?
yes,
I mean, my name, right, is, well, my real name is Stilgar for a reason. So, I mean, even like Arrakis or Dune, the Dune planet is kind of inspired by Mars as well. So, anyway, there's something about it that definitely tickles the imagination.
yeah, I agree, Stilgar, and it seems like we're not the only ones that think that way. A lot of people have over time. And Edgar Rice Burroughs, he he had in his book, the humanoid civilization is trying to keep their planet alive, and they're the only ones that are, and they're bringing water down from the North Pole to irrigate the planet. So that was, and most of the surface of the planet is just a desert, and the atmosphere is dissipating, and a lot of the water has dissipated. And I actually kind of feel like Edgar Rice Burroughs was hitting close to the truth to some extent. We'll come back to that, but then the next thing I want to talk about is C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis, in 1938, he wrote a book called Out of the Silent Planet, which was also set on Mars. Now, in C.S. Lewis's book, Mars is called Malacandra, and it's also a dying planet. The canals are actually deep canyons, and the water at the bottom of the canyons is like comes from hot springs, and it makes that area like hospitable for life. It heats it up. and that's where most of the plants and animals and the surviving cultures live. There's 3 different sentient species. One of them is semi-humanoid, the other 2 are not. And above the deep canyons, the surface is mostly dead, but it's like a cold desert, and the air is very thin where humans can't breathe it without like some kind of apparatus. So in his version, again, like Mars is a dying world, and but he takes a more Christian approach to alien life, where the alien life is not a product of evolution; it's a product of creation. And in his books, the silent planet is actually Earth, because Earth is where Satan is, and so once Satan rebels, the other planets are kind of cut off from contact with Earth. It's closed. So it's kind of interesting because
that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd recommend that one as well. In that one, like the premise is each planet has an angel that's in charge of it, and so the angel that was in charge of Earth was Satan, which I don't know, but that's the approach that he took. So, but you can see how they all kind of stem from Percival Lowell's idea about the canals being an attempt to survive, and the planet is mostly dying, and a lot of the surface is just a desert.
Can I just say, because there's a lot of stuff around ancient Egypt around, like people are really into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some people that are saying that Egypt, the pyramids are actually much older than we think they are now. Like, or I guess archaeologists believe they are. Like some people say, well, they're much older, and that Egypt at one point was actually a tropical place with a lot of water.
Yeah,
and that's why the Sphinx is there's signs of supposedly of water damage, or like a lot of rain running over it, like carving out the stone. So yeah, and so in a way, of course, if you look at it now and you look at the pyramids, you're outside of the Nile area, it is like a dying kind of desert environment. So just think it's interesting that there must be some kind of link between Mars and ancient Egypt as well. And I think there's a lot of stuff around that as also in science fiction.
yes.
But yeah. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I'm going to say more on that a bit later. That is, people have tried to connect Egypt to Mars in various ways, and yeah, I mean, our world also is dying, to some extent. Like we have the Sahara Desert actually growing, and of course, the ruling class type people, they like to blame it all on, cows and cars and stuff. But this was happening in the ancient world, and it's been going on for thousands of years. And actually, that's something I am saving later on. I want to talk about the climate change of the ancient world, and some of what I've come across in some of my various readings. I've come across all kinds of stuff, but yeah, later on, you're right. Later on, we'll come to that. But getting back to this, so in 1838 is when C.S. Lewis wrote his book, Out of the Silent Planet, which J.R.R. Tolkien also thought was really good. And then another thing that happened in 1938 was Orson Welles, not related to H.G. Wells and spelt differently, but you may have heard of this. Orson Welles was a radio entertainer, and he basically took War of the Worlds and made a radio drama adaptation of it with aliens from Mars invading the Earth. Now, in his you've heard, right?
Yeah.
So
that's also what the movies are based on, I think. The latest one as well. With Tom Cruise, I think it is, or if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe I didn't watch that one. I know there was a TV series that was made like in the 80s or 90s called about, I think it was actually called War of the Worlds. It was like a show where aliens from Mars were invading the Earth, but the aliens from Mars were humanoid. In that one, they had like green blood or something. And I might collect that series and watch it again because all the new stuff I hate. But yeah, so for his adaptation, he had it. The original story was mostly focused on England. He had his adaptation focused on the United States, where the aliens were invading here, and for some reason, the way that he decided to frame the story was in the format of newscasts, like reporters talking about, what was happening, like, oh my goodness, it's landing, it's coming out. And, I'm here live in New York or whatever. Of course, before they began their broadcast, they did announce that, hey, this is fiction, that it's not real, that we're about to broadcast. This is just a drama. But what happened is when they started broadcasting it, there were a lot of people that missed that announcement at the beginning. So a lot of people actually freaked out and thought that this was really happening. Like, it created a scare. And they had been primed to think this because of all of the, the cultural saturation that this idea had done. So I want to read a little bit of this. I got a quote here from the broadcast. I'll try to read it in like a 1930s voice. Maybe it'll be cringe. Here we go. Good heavens, something's wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now here's another, and another one, and another one. They look like tentacles to me. I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather. But that face, it, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black and gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped, with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. So yeah, the culture was already saturated with this idea. So a lot of people, when they miss the announcement, they're just like, oh man, I don't know, it's happening. But anyway, any comments on that? Or
no, I do know about it, and I know that there was supposedly a big panic about it. But then I heard that actually it wasn't that big of it was like pretty much exaggerated.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know if it's like an urban legend altogether. I think some people did freak out, but it was people were like, some people, like, apparently some people were like, a lot of people were frightened, but like very few actually acted on their fear. So yeah. Anyway,
it did. So I don't know what the percentage of the population was. It was a small percent, but there's still like quite a few people that thought it was real.
But I think it's like one of those things that then gets like turns into like the story, and I really doubt like it was really that much of a thing. So apparently no deaths or major injuries were directly linked to the broadcast. They actually, and accounts of mass evacuations were largely anecdotal. So anyway, I don't want to go off the path too much, but it's just one of those things. So
it didn't cause any serious harm, but it created enough of a disturbance that they tried to go after him legally. They tried to go after him, but there was no legal grounds for it. And he was protected because of the disclaimer he made at the beginning. So, but it's just an example of how this idea had just been accepted, and it was a common folk belief. Like it was like a fairly mainstream idea, even though the scientific establishment didn't officially endorse this or accept it. A
lot of people still believe that it was in the realm of possibilities. So
yes, now people believed this. It was in the realm of possibilities up until the 1960s, when actual probes were sent to Mars in order to get a closer look. So in 1964, the Mariner 4 probe arrived at Mars, and it passed within 6,118 miles of the surface of Mars. That in kilometers, that's 9,864. and it found that the surface of Mars, based on like the observations that it was able to take, the surface of Mars turned out to be much more like the moon than it was like Earth. They found that it was dry and dead and covered with craters, and that the atmosphere was extremely thin. Now, of course, not all of Mars looks like that, but there are some parts that are definitely very moon-like. So that and later probes killed the idea that Mars is a habitable world with people living on it. Now, as we talk about this, just to be clear, I'm not naming all of the probes that were sent to Mars. I don't even know how many. I could probably find a list, but just, ones that are culturally significant. So in 1971, Mariner 9 was sent to Mars, where it became the first probe to permanently enter orbit. So the others would just kind of fly by, but they wouldn't stay. So Mariner 9 took photos of nearly 100% of the surface of Mars, and it found volcanoes, mountains, and erosion features. So it's possible that these erosion features might have been what Giovanni Schiaparelli and Percival Lowell were seeing, although some of the stuff they saw could have also just been due to their illusions created by their telescopes, because their equipment was not that great by our modern standards. Definitely didn't give them a perfect picture. So, yeah, they found features resembling dried riverbeds, which caused scientists to conclude that in the past, Mars was more like Earth and must have had liquid water. In 1975, the Viking 1 and Viking 2 probes were sent to Mars, each containing a lander and an orbiter. They were designed for the specific purpose of looking for signs of life. Now, to be fair, what NASA is doing here is they're not looking for sentient life. They're looking for like bacteria and protists. Viking 1 was the first probe to successfully land and function on the surface of Mars and continued to operate until 1982. Viking 2 functioned up until 1978. So these probes are going to analyze the soil mainly. Neither probe found any evidence of life, but they did find carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus, which are elements that are necessary for life as we know it. Now, conclusive evidence that there used to be liquid water on the surface of Mars was found in 2004 when NASA landed the Spirit probe in a place called the Gusev crater, and Opportunity probe in Meridiani Planum. So in 2013, NASA's Curiosity rover found rounded pebbles in some of the dry riverbeds on Mars, indicating that these rivers were most likely not ephemeral, but, places where water was flowing for years. Analysis of the rocks indicated that they rolled about 30 miles down the river. So if anybody wants to see more on that, I'll put a link. But they also found sand and pebbles mixed with sand. So anybody who's been down a river in real life, you'll notice that in some parts of the river, you'll have sandbars. And of course, where the water flows into the ocean, you get beaches. That's a result of erosion on the land. It's flowing water creates sand, basically. So now I want to talk about basically the characteristics of Mars, like what it's like physically, because it's interesting. Mars has about 40% of Earth's gravity and a radius of 2,106 miles, which is 3,390 kilometers. And the length of one day on Mars is 24.6 hours. So very similar to Earth as far as that goes. And one Earth day, we say 24 hours, but it's actually 23.9 hours. A year on Mars is 669.6 Mars days, which is the equivalent of 687 Earth days. Mars also tilts on the axis of Mars is tilted at 25 degrees to the plane of orbit. And the tilt for Earth is 23.5 degrees. This is why we have seasons. The red color comes from iron oxide, which saturates the dirt and the dust of the surface. So it's rust, like what's happening in the Titanic. It's rusting and falling apart. So rust is what gives Mars its red color, which, again, to have iron oxide, you need to have oxygen. So there is oxygen there. Now, there's not much in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere of Mars is over 90% carbon dioxide. And I have a breakdown here of the proportions of Mars's atmosphere. 95.32% carbon dioxide, 2.7% nitrogen, 1.6% argon, and then molecular oxygen, which is O2, is 0.13%. That's the oxygen that's in the atmosphere, not accounting for all the oxygen that's bonded with the iron, the dirt. Carbon monoxide, 0.07%. Water vapor, 0.03%. Now, what happens with water on Mars is it cannot stay in a liquid state for very long. So, it's there as ice, and usually it just goes straight to gas. Now, not in all cases. They found some evidence that there's still liquid water in some places, but
I think one of the problems or the challenges is that the pressure of the atmosphere is only 0.6% of Earth's atmosphere.
Yes.
So I think if you have very low pressure, then water will go from ice to gas pretty much immediately.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly the case. It has less than 1% the atmospheric density of Earth. So in its present conditions, you couldn't have huge oceans and rivers of water, which, it leads a lot of scientists to conclude, maybe all of them, that in the past the atmosphere of Mars was different, and that's how come there were rivers and oceans of water. And
in fact, it needed to have an atmosphere in order for there to be all these, remnants of what clearly what used to be rivers and lakes and seas even.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So, regarding the existence of liquid water, I just want to read this quote from NASA. So what NASA says is here, Mars appears to have had a watery past with ancient river valley networks, deltas, and lake beds, as well as rocks and minerals on the surface that could only have formed in liquid water. Some features suggest that Mars experienced huge floods about 3.5 billion years ago. There is water on Mars today, but the Martian atmosphere is too thin for liquid water to exist for long on the surface. Today, water on Mars is found in the form of water ice just under the surface in the polar regions, as well as in briny, salty water, which seasonally flows down some hillsides and crater walls. So I've seen images of the very heavily salty water that flows, kind of leaves a streak there certain times of the year down the sides of like cliffs and things. Doesn't last for very long. Now, I disagree with 3.5 billion years ago. They don't know that. They're just plugging, things into their timeline based on what's already in the timeline. But the idea of huge floods, it kind of makes me think of the huge flood that we had on Earth. And, I'm considering the possibility that the two things are linked, but I haven't really come up with a full theory on that yet. So I'm going to leave it for now. But the temperature on Mars can get up into the 70s Fahrenheit around the equator. I don't know what that translates to in Celsius, but
I think it's around 20 Celsius or something.
Oh,
so
yeah. So
room temperature, I think, right?
Ideal temperature for my house, like what I keep my house on inside. And
Mhm.
of course, this is in the tropic zones now. Because Mars's atmosphere is so thin, it does not retain heat, and temperature gets as low as negative 225 degrees Fahrenheit, and which is negative 135 Celsius. So if it had a proper atmosphere like Earth does, then it wouldn't be so cold, even at the equator. It still wouldn't be as warm as Earth, but a lot of the surface would be livable, tolerable. Now, why? What is the culprit? What's the problem that that caused Mars to go from having water to not having water? And one thing about Mars that is a huge problem that makes it very different from Earth is that it has no magnetosphere. There's some areas in the southern hemisphere that are highly magnetized, which indicates that there probably used to be a magnetosphere in the past. Now, magnetosphere is very important because it creates kind of like a force field type of thing that protects the planet from solar winds. So the sun is blowing off like tons and tons of mass, and it actually creates an erosive wind that goes through the solar system. Now in our world, that effect, it creates the aurora borealis effect if you're far enough north, as the solar winds are striking against the magnetosphere. But the magnetosphere protects our world from the solar winds, causes them to go around us, and it also is what causes your compass to work. But Mars doesn't have a magnetosphere, so what's happening is these solar winds are just striking it, and they're irradiating the surface. They're also stripping away the atmosphere. So Mars's atmosphere is like fizzling off into space. And this is, what the scientific establishment believes is that in the past, Mars had a magnetosphere and a proper, maybe Earth-like atmosphere, at any case, an atmosphere that allowed liquid water to exist. And then something caused the magnetosphere to fail. And after that, the atmosphere started getting stripped away. Of course, the water can, for the most part, not exist in liquid form. And then when it goes into the gaseous form, it gets stripped off into space. So the planet is dehydrated. Like their process of desertification is farther along than ours. So, now, of course, this brings us to the idea that in the past, there did used to be life on Mars. And some people, including even some actual credentialed scientists, believe that there used to be sentient life on Mars. Certainly a lot of people on YouTube that believe it, commentators and stuff, which is actually kind of what spurred me to cover this, is because some people I follow were talking about this thing, and I wanted to deal with it thoroughly. So on July 25, 1976, the Viking 1 probe took a picture of something in the northern hemisphere of Mars that looked like a giant stone face, and staring up into space, basically. And the region of Mars that this thing was found in is called Cydonia. That's spelled Cydonia, if you want to look up pictures of this. Near this giant head were things that looked a lot like pyramids. And the general area of Cydonia is near what supposedly used to be the coast of a great ocean. Like in the ancient world, supposedly the northern area of Mars, like the North Pole, the Arctic, and it used to be a big ocean. So Mars had like a big ocean right on the top. And then they published that image, and a lot of people saw it and they were like, whoa, that's a face on Mars. Somebody had to build that. In 1998, it of course, people saw that and immediately wanted it to be investigated further. So in 1998, NASA sent the Mars Global Surveyor, which took more pictures of this object from space. Now, the second time they went to take a picture of it, it looked very different. Didn't it all look like a head? Looked like a bunch of gobbledygook. but it still had a somewhat, it was still within a somewhat regular kind of rounded frame. So they went and they took more pictures of it again, and in the more recent pictures, again, it looks more like a face, although, kind of sanded down, I guess. I mean, you can look at it and form your own opinion. In 2001, the Mars Global Survey took another picture with sharper resolution, and again, it looked more like a face, but not quite as much as the original picture taken by Viking. But still, I mean, it does look like that, whether it's natural or man-made. It does look like some kind of weird face. So the surveyor also took a picture of something that has a square shape. And this image was kind of forgotten for a long time, but it was taken in 2001. And recently, people have been circulating this image on the internet, and it looks like it's a square shape where you have something that looks kind of like a wall with a 90-degree angle. And I'll put pictures of this in the slideshow. I'm sure you can also find it just by looking. But it caught the attention of Joe Rogan, posted on Twitter, and then Elon Musk underneath, he said, we need to investigate this. We need to send a manned mission to Mars to investigate this thing. And Elon Musk has also, there was an interview he did with Ted Cruz a while ago, where he was asked, what are we going to find on Mars? Is there going to be life there? And he said there won't be any sentient life there, but what you might find is ruins that were left behind by a extinct civilization, or maybe some microscopic life. Now, as far as NASA goes, their official position is that all these formations and objects on Mars that people are saying are buildings, pyramids, and stuff like that, they're all natural formations, and they're formed by natural processes. The only reason that people think they resemble structures is because of a process called pareidolia. So pareidolia is kind of a new word to me, but basically what it is it's where you see something and you imagine it to be the product of design when it's not. So you're not really seeing these things, you're just imagining you are to some extent. Now, to me, these objects on Mars that could be pyramids, that could be a face, it's not necessary that they are. They could be natural formations. I mean, they don't have very clean, sharp edges to them, although the square thing, whatever it is, it kind of does. So it's not like something that's conclusive at this point. But the idea of saying, you're just imagining it, that's not really an answer either. I think at this point, I would agree with Elon Musk. These things should be investigated. I don't know whether they're man-made or not, but there's enough there that I'm not just going to assume either way as a fact until there's a thorough investigation. There's enough there that I think an investigation is in order. Now, it doesn't look like they want to do it. The priority of NASA is to look for microscopic life. And I've been following NASA since I was old enough to read, when I was 5 or 6. And I've noticed in all this time that they really want to find bacteria and protists on other planets. And their approach is to look for conditions where there's liquid water and organic molecules, because they think that, or at least their official stated position is the atheistic worldview that life can come from non-life, and that if you have the molecular ingredients from life, then all you need is time, and eventually you will have life. So their priority is to look for that stuff. They don't really care to examine any of these structures. it's kind of dismissive. Of course, when it comes to these agencies, like there's quite often a difference between what they want you to believe and what they actually believe. But that's just what I've noticed. They're not interested. I know Elon Musk is interested. I hope he'll look at it. Now, there's a scientist who has come up with a theory that Mars was nuked, and that's what caused it to become uninhabitable. So I want to talk about his theory.
Okay, can I first talk about why Mars lost its magnetosphere?
Sure.
Do you know why?
I don't know why. I've heard
Okay,
different theories. But...
so Mars used to have a liquid center, just like the Earth does. That's why we have volcanoes, because we have a lot of liquid, or like lava, or what do you call it? If it's underground, it's not lava, but it's basically magma, molten rock, and Mars had the same thing. How do we know that? Because Mars has the tallest volcano in our in the solar system, which is called
Olympus Mons.
Exactly. So we know Mars had a active or had a liquid core, and then because the magnetosphere is actually generated, it's like a dynamo. It's because all that liquid is then revolving around a solid core,
mm-hmm.
and that is creating the friction, or the magnetic field that then protects the planet from losing the atmosphere, which is the same thing which is happening to here on Earth. Because if we didn't have a liquid magma, then we wouldn't have a magnetosphere either, and we would be going the same way as Mars is.
Right.
But anyway, at some point, because Mars is a little bit smaller, I think that maybe that's the reason. But at some point, basically, the inner core, or the core of Mars, cooled down, and because of that, it lost its magnetosphere. So
yeah, I mean that could be. I mean, there's not a date on it, and
there's no date on it. They now think that it was actually active earlier and longer, till not that long ago. So they're still, but it's a lot of hypotheses going about.
Yes.
And then it's hard to prove, but some people. So the nuke thing, I'm interested to hear, because some people are actually suggesting we should nuke Mars to try and get I think you'd have to drill first, and then use a lot of nuclear weapons to melt the inner core of Mars again, so you can restart the magnetosphere.
Yeah, although just to be clear, when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to the Earth, the very center, the central core, is a solid piece of metal. It's
same with Mars. So you need to have a solid inside, and then you need to have all this molten rock, basically rubbing over it to create the effect.
So I saw what you were talking about, the articles about suggesting nuking Mars, and of course the lack of the magnetosphere is the biggest obstacle to terraforming Mars. You could bring gases and water there from the outer solar system, or maybe just melt the gases and waters that are at the polar caps. Also, I've seen some articles saying that there's supposedly a bunch of water beneath the surface of Mars, but I didn't read those. I just kind of glanced at them. But whatever you do, it's not going to stick unless you have some way to deal with the solar wind, which that's the main problem there. But let's talk about this guy's theory, and then I can share my own speculation and theories. The scientist's name is J.E. Brandenburg, and he was actually on Fox News. And Tim Pool also talked about him, which is actually where I saw this idea first. But then I did a search and all sorts of other stuff came up. So he proposes that Mars was hit by nuclear explosions. And prior to that, it was home to sentient humanoid life. And what he told Fox News is this. The Martian surface is covered with a thin layer of radioactive substances, including uranium, thorium, and radioactive potassium, and this pattern radiates from a hot spot on Mars. Now, in his own paper, which I read, he said that the xenon isotope, he says that, one of his papers, the xenon isotope mass spectrum of Mars atmosphere matches that from the open-air nuclear testing on Earth and is characteristic of fast neutron fission rather than that produced by a moderated nuclear reactor. And so there's uranium, thorium, and potassium that are, the word he uses is hyperabundant on the surface of Mars. Now, the meteorites that have come to Earth from Mars, they don't contain all this radiation, which is one of the things that causes other scientists to object to his theories. However, what he says is that those meteorites, supposedly they come from subsurface rocks on Mars, and the radiation is mostly relegated to the surface. So.
Okay.
Yeah,
but then again, isn't the surface of Mars radioactive because of the sun?
It is.
Sun's radiation? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There's the surface of Mars is radioactive pretty much all over. However, there are 2 points of extremely concentrated radiation. And there you have a lot of radioactive potassium and thorium. And these areas are Cydonia and another place called Galaxias Chaos. And here I want to quote from his paper. He says, based on the pattern of thorium and radioactive potassium gamma radiation, the explosions were centered in the northern plains of Mare Acadalium at approximately 50 north, 30 west near Cydonia Mints, and in the Utopia Planum at approximately 50 north, 120 west near Galaxias Chaos, both locations of possible archaeological artifacts. So I've known about Cydonia for years, since about at least 22, 23 years. I've kind of had my eye on it. Galaxias Chaos I've never heard of before, but supposedly when the water was on Mars, Galaxias Chaos would have been an island in the Northern Sea, and it's got all kinds of lines like crisscrossing it, like the land is kind of broken up into different shapes. And so what he believes is that the bombs were detonated above the surface of Mars, not on it, which is why they left huge radioactive imprints in which the concentrations of radiation remain there to this day, but no craters. And he says that when these bombs were detonated, the shock waves went over much of the surface, and he thinks that they were deliberately detonated over the major centers of civilization, which he thinks is Cydonia and Galaxias Chaos, and that whoever was there would have been killed instantly, and then the rest of the world, which was less populated, maybe they don't die right away, but they would have slowly and surely died in miserable fashions from the radiation. So if anybody wants to read the whole paper, he published in the Journal of Cosmology in 2014, and the name of the paper is Evidence of a Massive Thermonuclear Explosion on Mars in the Past, the Cydonian Hypothesis and Fermi's Paradox, by John E. Brandenburg, PhD. I'll have a link to where you can download the PDF of his paper in the description below. So his conclusion is that Mars was home to a Bronze Age civilization that built pyramids and a face and some other things. And he cites some other objects that he thinks are faces. I think those are a bit less certain, a bit sketchy. But he compares this this theoretical civilization to the Egyptians and the Olmecs back on Earth. And he believes that they were nuked by a hostile interstellar culture who wanted to end the threat while it was still in seed form, basically, assuming that this culture might go into space and be a competitor for them. Now, last thing I want to do regarding his theory is read a quote from him, from his conclusion. So he says here, in part of his conclusion, given the large amount of nuclear isotopes in Mars' atmosphere resembling those from hydrogen bomb tests on Earth, Mars may present an example of civilization wiped out by a nuclear attack from space, such as seen in the movie Dark Star. Therefore, the resolution of the Fermi paradox may lie within easy reach of the human race. It is perhaps a dark star scenario. It is possible the Fermi paradox means that our interstellar neighborhood contains forces hostile to young, noisy civilizations such as ourselves. Such hostile forces could range from things as alien as AI, artificial intelligence, with a grudge against flesh and blood, as in the movie Terminator, all the way to things as sadly familiar to us as a mindless humanoid bureaucrat like Governor Tarkin in Star Wars, eager to destroy planet Alderaan, as an example to other worlds. In either case, the most dangerous thing to intelligent life in the cosmos may be other intelligent life. If this is so, discovering this fact on Mars may allow us to prepare to survive any confrontation with such forces. Therefore, the author suggests that the Cydonia and Mars nuclear data be viewed in the context of the Fermi paradox, and appropriate efforts to explore Mars with human archaeologists be undertaken immediately. So he recommends that we place permanent human settlements on Mars and begin to study these artifacts. And just to be clear, I'm not 100%. I give it a 50% chance that these things on Mars are man-made. So I guess you could say I'm agnostic on this issue. I don't know if they're natural formations, because they're not as well formed as like most of the human artifacts. Like they've got kind of rough edges and things like that. And however, they do look enough like constructed things that they could be constructed things, and we won't know that unless one way or the other. It's enough to arouse my suspicions, where I think we should investigate it, as Elon Musk said. And just to be fair, because some of the scientists are saying, oh, these things aren't they're not perfectly geometrical. They're not. They don't have all the sharp angles. These could be. These are not man-made things. These are natural formations because they lack the sharp edges and stuff like that. But man, if you look at the pyramid of Amenemhat I, it just looks like a mound of dirt, and the pyramids of Amenemhat III, they don't really look like pyramids anymore either. Like, to the average person, they could be just natural formations. Like they look less like pyramids than these things on Mars. And same is true of some of the ziggurats in the Middle East. Like some of the old Sumerian stuff just looks like a lump of dirt now. Some of these ancient ziggurats in like the city of Kela, which is one of the first settlements in the world, according to the Bible. It's mentioned there in Genesis. It was built by the Assyrians. That it looks mostly like a mound of dirt. I mean, we know where it is, but it has not survived in good form to the modern world. So I think that just because these things aren't as well preserved as, say, like the Djoser pyramid, or the Great Pyramid of Egypt, doesn't mean that, the actually, in fact, the Middle Kingdom pyramids, like we talked about, are in much worse shape than the Old Kingdom pyramids. So again, like, I don't know if there's life there or there was life there or not, but it's one of those things where there's enough indications that I think it should be investigated. But at any rate, like, there's one thing I want to consider, like one more thing I want to mention with regards to the potential of alien life, or speculating about alien life. Like all these scientists and stuff that I quoted from, they're mostly like atheist type people. But I just want to mention some Bible verses which I think are relevant and we should bear in mind whenever we consider the possibility that there could be alien life and what form it would take. So according to John 1:3, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And then Colossians 1:16-17, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. So if there is other life out there, we can be sure that it was made by God. And one thing that kind of makes this a little bit credible to me is that he is saying that the life on Mars used to be humanoid. And I kind of think that if aliens are real, then they probably would be humanoid, because the Bible says that we were made in the image of God. So if he makes something else in the image of God, I would expect it to be humanoid as well. And, from our own world and like what we know, the things that are lower life forms than humans are generally like the animals. They're not humanoid. Things that are higher life forms, like, it says we were made a little bit lower than the angels. The angels are also humanoid, but then like the other things like cherubim and seraphim, which are higher than that, are these weird abstract things. So it's just something to think about. I guess thoughts, speculation.
Yeah, I mean, why not?
Then why not?
Could
right?
Yeah, why not? And I definitely think we should go there. I mean, I think that's. I think we should be exploring space. So, and I think Mars. I've always been intrigued by Mars. I think there's something calling us. I think that's why it's represented in like a lot of the mythology that you talked about, and also, like a lot of science fiction. I think the curiosity is a natural thing, and I think it's we should strive to go there. So, and even if life will be very difficult there, it will still be interesting to go. I don't know if I believe in Elon Musk, where he wants to make life multiplanetary, and I don't know if Mars is the right candidate for it. I used to be convinced of it, and I hope that let's say when I was a kid, I hope that by the time I was the age I am now, that we'd already be on Mars.
Yeah, me too, man.
But yeah, it's been a huge disappointment, considering. I feel like we probably could have been there already if we wanted to.
Yeah.
I think it would be very difficult to have a permanent base there, but there's a lot of interesting stuff to discover, and I think that alone is worth it. And then people say, "Well, it's so much money," but look at how much money we're wasting on all kinds of crap nowadays, like on the wars and like on, or even just like a lot of just pointless entertainment. Like we waste a lot of our. If we talk about money, like what does money actually represent? It represents productivity, because you can spend, let's say you work 8 hours a day. You can work 8 hours, farming working on a farm, growing stuff, or you could, work 8 hours in a factory creating soccer balls. I don't know. But you can't do both at the same time. So you have to pick and choose. And we choose to spend a lot of our time creating things that we really don't need, or that kill us, or that kill other people. And then when we talk about going to do a different planet, then all of a sudden it's like, well, like we can't afford it and all of that. So I'm a bit skeptical. Yeah. But I feel like we should definitely try to go there. Yeah.
So I agree with Elon Musk that we should become a multi-planet species. Not everybody on Earth needs to colonize space, but like some of us should. And but I had a thought, because when I was reading his theory about Mars getting nuked, it's consistent with the thread of disease and of death, disease and suffering, right? Because if it was nuked, then like the people that get hit by the nuke are actually they actually suffer the least. Although I guess that also depends on where you go after you die, but the people that are around the edges are the ones that are going to die slowly and wretchedly. So he's still his theory is still tracking with a lot of the ancient assumptions about Mars, which to me gives it a little bit of a boost of credibility. Although again, like I'm not 100% convinced. I give it maybe 50% chance, and if I was a normie, I would probably just accept what NASA says. Like, okay, these so-called pyramids, they're not like perfect pyramid shapes. They could just be pointy hills and things. But I've seen enough ancient sites, that honestly, to me, some of this stuff really does look like an ancient site. And like that square thing looks like the foundation of the building. Of course, just because it looks like that doesn't mean it is. But I find the idea that these things are natural formations to also be kind of suspect. And also the idea of Mars losing its atmosphere, when I read Revelations, in Revelation it talks about something similar. It says it says the sky was rolled up like a scroll, which if something stripped away our atmosphere, like something passed by and stripped off part of our atmosphere, it might look like that. And then it also talks about the sun is given power to burn and scorch men. So I'm just kind of thinking, like, losing an atmosphere. What if there's a couple possibilities that it could be. Like, what if this actually was alien life and they already had their end times events and they're all dead? Or maybe these things are all just natural formations that but then there was still liquid water there, so it could have been that there was no indigenous life, but maybe it could have been a habitable world in the past or close to it. And I'm also thinking another possibility is, before the flood, humans used to live a long time, right? So imagine some guy like Elon Musk decides, I want to go to Mars, and he has 900 years to make it happen. Like, imagine if we had that kind of lifespan today. George Washington would still be alive. Most of the founding fathers would still be alive. Imagine what people could do with those kind of lifespans. So another possibility, like a thought that's been in my head, is what if before the flood they actually did colonize Mars? And the reason you only see like pyramids and other things on Mars has less gravity. Like, we still don't know how the old kingdom pyramids were built here on Earth, but I imagine, like, I'm not an engineer, but I imagine in less gravity you could build much bigger things. Like you could build that same kind of stuff but on a bigger scale. And of course, if we don't know how advanced necessarily the world was before the flood, and even after the flood to some extent, or if there were people on Mars, how advanced they were. Like, just because the only thing that's left, like assuming those things are artificial, just because the only thing that's left is made out of stone and brick doesn't mean that's the only thing there was. Like the Titanic is not going to be around in 100 years because it's rusting and falling apart. Most of the modern stuff made out of metal and and glass and even brick to some extent doesn't last very long in the grand scheme of things. Like, if you don't maintain that stuff, it's gonna deteriorate. So, and one more thing I thought of, and then I'll stop, is the idea of Mars being nuked by an alien civilization. There's an old movie that came out in the I guess the 50s, maybe the 40s. No, it was after World War II. So probably the 50s, but it's called The Day the Earth Stood Still. Have you seen it? Basically, the premise of that movie is that there's the humans, they're after World War II, they already nuked Japan, and different countries are making nukes, like the US and the Soviet Union. So there's this.
I think I have seen it, but I think I've seen a modern version of it.
Yeah, I didn't.
That's possible.
I think the modern version, they have a totally different premise because they make it like environmentalism and stuff. But
if the Earth, if it actually stopped turning, that would be a huge disaster. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the original movie, basically, the alien he comes to give a warning to the humans, and he says, in outer space, we don't tolerate wars and violence like this. So as long as you're on your own world and you're fighting each other, we don't really care. You can nuke each other if that's what you want to do, but don't come into space and try to nuke us or we'll destroy you. Like, it's not allowed. So on Earth, you can do whatever you want, but if you go into space and you bring that violence with you, then we're going to kill you. So, man, what if it was a human colony and some alien species is like, nah, you guys are not gonna go out into space, and they just like nuked the dickens out of it. Because I could see that happening. Like, I don't believe in like the millions and billions of years or that life is inevitable from non-life or anything like that. But I'm just thinking, Satan is here on Earth, and like, I don't think aliens would want to come to Earth if they exist. But I imagine if we started going out into space and bringing a lot of the disgusting stuff with us, and the satanic stuff, they might just be like, oh no, and blow it away. But again, this is all speculation. Maybe it's all dead and has always been dead. Maybe it's just NASA's right, and it's just pareidolia or whatever. Pareidolia.
Well, the whole thing about like the whole theory that I think that was very hot in the 90s, where life would if you just have like inorganic materials and you just throw them together, and then somehow out of this soup, like some kind of life would start to form just throughout time. I think there's a lot of it has been debunked since. Like, that was really big, I think, in the 90s, and that's also why I think NASA is looking for microbial life everywhere, because then they hope that it will prove
that life
will just exist out of happenstance. By happenstance, if the circumstances are right. Which I think even if they do find microbial life on different planets, it still won't prove that. It just proves that life has been created on more than one planet.
Yeah.
Or there's also a theory that life is actually like whenever like an asteroid hits a planet, it will like take the elements of life from one planet to another one. So there's multiple theories, like it's like the sperm theory or something. Anyway, but yeah, no, I think nowadays we know that for life just to come into existence out of nothing.
Not possible.
You need to have more faith than the average believer,
Right.
because it's there's they talk about like the faith of the gaps, but there's like anyway.
The whole thing
you need to make some huge leaps of faith, because it would, like, we understand now like how complex even the most basic forms of life actually are, that it just doesn't make any sense. But yeah,
and you need DNA to code to life, because everything that's in the cell in your body, or if it's just a single cell, everything that's in the cell is a result of the DNA that's in the cell. Like, it's all coded. And the DNA is what is how you're able to reproduce and make more of yourself. And without the DNA, you can't have a cell, because the DNA is a blueprint for the cell. But without the cell, you can't have the DNA. If DNA is just like in water or the dirt by itself, it's going to come apart. So it's not, it's pretty,
it's a whole thing of like, if you have like a what do you call it, like a scrap yard with like all this old junk metal,
mm-hmm.
and then there's a storm, but the storm is forever, right? So time is basically just forever. And then at some point the storm will create like a Boeing 747. Yeah, so it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. And honestly, man, when I see them saying this kind of stuff, like I've had like, even on some of our videos, atheists to come and like, if you just read this or that, or you should look at what our scientists say. Like, my guy, I've been reading what you guys have been saying for over 30 years. And the problem is that you conflate, there's a disconnect between the evidence and the interpretation of the evidence. So anybody can interpret evidence, like I just gave a couple theories of my own. That doesn't make them a fact. Okay, like even if you're coming from an official source, your interpretation of the evidence is still just that. And if it's not something that's proven by facts, or even something that's possible, like life coming from non-life, then it doesn't work. So I suspect that a lot of these establishment types, what they say is what they want us to believe, not what they themselves actually believe. Although some of them are pretty zealous.
I think they probably believe it, because, I mean, in the end, like, we're all people. I think a lot of people want to believe that there's no creator, because it makes life easier.
Yeah, it does.
Because there are no consequences.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of them do actually believe it, and even like the most intelligent person, I think will still have fears and will still have desires that are just ingrained into who we are as a human being, as a creature. Mm-hmm. So even if they don't admit it, they'll still have very strong biases. And so, I don't think, I think they believe it, because they want to believe it.
Well, yeah,
because it's convenient. Yeah.
You're in agreement with Kent Hovind. He actually said that to me when I went and visited him. He kept saying, I can't, I don't get how they can believe this dumb idea. And I said, don't you ever get the impression that they don't believe it and that they're just trying to trick people? He said, no, I don't know, man. It's hard to know what somebody's really thinking inside their head. Especially for me, because I can't pick up on the nonverbal stuff. But I mean, who knows? Like, I do know a lot of people, they'll say one thing and think something else.
Sure.
But I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe they really do believe
it.
I
mean, I used to believe it myself. I grew up as an atheist, so.
But then you abandoned it.
Yeah, I abandoned it. And I think the funny thing is that a lot of atheists think is that people become Christians because it's easy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, hell no. It's the opposite way.
Yeah.
When I was an atheist, life was easy because there are no consequences and you can just do whatever the hell you want.
Right.
So I think it's the other way around. So what they're accusing believers of is actually what they're doing themselves. Is they're finding, like, they're creating a construct that makes it easy, and they have blind faith in that, that this is the way. And I can respect somebody that's agnostic, but these people that are convinced, it's like, convinced based on what? Just look at how complex everything is, and they're just convinced. It's like, well, that takes an incredible amount of faith. But in this case, I think it's a convenient form of faith. But anyway,
Yeah. So I I don't trust NASA. I mean, I semi trust them. I kind of partly trust them. I trust them when
well,
it
I mean,
comes
in the end,
to,
it's just people, right? So it's just like any other place. I
but
think they're doing some fantastic things actually with some of these Mars rovers.
right. But
Um,
what I'm getting at
yeah,
is I don't really NASA. They definitely have an ideology, and I don't trust them to investigate these sites that could be things. I would rather see like Elon and SpaceX go and investigate this stuff because I mean I've noticed, like, on the other hand, I've noticed the media really wants us to believe in aliens, and they pushed that really hard for a while in 2024, and then they backed off. Of course, their idea of alien is this stupid looking thing with like the big head and a pencil neck. But so I basically what I'm getting at is, like, if NASA comes out and says that there's absolutely never was any life on Mars, I probably won't believe them. But if they come out and say, yeah, there was life on Mars, I probably still won't believe them, because of how trust has been broken. So I would like to see, like, multiple parties from different agencies investigate this stuff, because when you have like different groups of people with different biases all investigating something, then you're more likely to get at the truth, especially if it's a situation where you can't go and see it for yourself. Like, we can't go and see this for ourselves. um, like
and I think that's a key there. Different groups, because I think, and group biases.
yeah,
Because I think that's what happens when you get like a large group of people together. They start to form their own biases. So whether it's the Catholic Church, you know, having a bias around the Earth
cosmology.
being the center of the universe,
Yeah,
or whether it's the scientific community having a bias around. Well, take this shot because it's the best thing ever, and trust the science. I think whenever you have a large group of people, they start to, it's kind of in our DNA again. We start to act like horde animals, and people start to toe the line. And they just stay in their lane, and the most idiotic things are become like the mainstream belief. So yeah, I'm highly skeptical of any group of people, including NASA. But I mean, then again, I think that there's also good scientists there working there for sure. Look at some of the jobs they've done with some of these rovers,
yes,
and if they were to go there and send a rover, I don't think they would hide it. I think they would still show it, unless somebody higher up would tell them not to show it, which might be the case. So
yeah, that
yeah.
might be the case. What I see from them is they're not even interested to look. They're trying to blow this stuff off without looking. But it is true that when I think,
Probably because if they admit it, you're like, imagine you work at NASA, you go to the office and you say, hey, you know what? I really want to look at this Sidonia thing. Like, I just want to have that. I don't think that happens. Why not? Because the moment you do that, you're going to get ridiculed, and everybody is going to think you're nuts.
yeah,
So yeah, it's not going to happen. But
that's why
probably
we got.
quite a few people working at NASA would love to go there and have a look. So
I think there's
you
some
know,
people that would like to have a look, but they're the minority. And I know Elon wants to have a look, and Trump also wants to go to Mars. And I hope it gets done. And I would, before I come down on this with a firm conclusion one way or the other, I'd like to see, I'd like to see evidence from multiple sources, that kind of corroborate. And people will say, well, you don't have to prove a negative, but there's enough indications here that, yeah, I mean, you might actually need to prove that these are not something real, because they do look like something. I mean, they look better than than a lot of the ancient Sumerian and quite a bit of the Egyptian stuff. Like if I was passing by the Pyramid of Amenemhat and I didn't know about it from my research, I don't think I would conclude that was a pyramid. So, and then we have some things in the United States like Cahokia Mounds that are structures, man-made structures built out of dirt. But it has to be investigated, man. It has to be investigated for us to really know. Like right now, we don't know. Like, they say that where there's smoke, there's fire. But, I mean, there's definitely some smoke, but we haven't seen any flames, so to speak. So, I mean, I'd like to see it investigated. I think NASA's good at taking pictures and measurements, but they definitely have a bias, in terms of what they're looking for. Like they really do have a major goal of trying to substantiate spontaneous generation, like life popping and life coming from non-life. I mean,
Yeah.
So
that one is obvious.
That's
If you've been following them throughout the years, it's been a huge focus for them.
That's their main focus.
I think it's even like it's become like their reason to exist almost.
Yeah.
So yeah, which is sad because I mean they do have other interesting projects as well, but yeah.
How I would repurpose NASA if I was the president? I would task them with finding resources and with finding places to live. I don't care if they're even, like what good is it if there is bacterial life? How does that help us? That only proves that there's bacterial life. It doesn't show you how it got there.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind finding that, but then like find it by actually going there and sending people taking the samples.
Yeah,
and not just try to do it with like using like a robot or like a telescope. I guess I would still prefer a robot over just a telescope. But anyway, yeah. But I think that there's a lot of issues around it, and it's there's a lot of government inefficiency, and there's yeah. So and that's anyway. So it's
you need to doge that.
Yeah. Well, you need to have like people that are actually believe in that believe in this, that this is important, and that they want to work extra hours and feel inspired. Because you cannot. I don't think you can use a bureaucracy with a bunch of bureaucrats, and NASA is not that. It is bureaucratic, but there are still people that have, I think, a lot of passion for what they do.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you lose that passion, then I think, and there's no guidance, then it's not gonna. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't.
Also, the way we have ideological regime changes in the United States, where it really retards our progress as far as space exploration, because you have
the whole moon project is based on like keeping people working, and I now know that Trump canceled the SOS space launcher, which I think was going to cost $1.5 billion for each launch, and the whole thing is built like on parts that are principles that are like old and antiquated. But the reason they did it is because they have this factory spread over the U.S. and these people need to work because that way you can get votes from those areas. So it's basically it's hopeless. So
I don't think
you're not gonna get to the moon.
Oh no, we can get to the moon if we. Like the whole reason we haven't is because of political instability, but I don't want to deal with
even if it was the whole project, I think was a major dud. The whole SLS project.
Well, Obama canceled the Constellation project, which was supposed to put us on the moon. So
yeah, but even W. Bush canceled it as well. So it's just been and there's been no like clear architect or like ideas, like, okay, how we're going to get there, how we're going to do it. It's been very piecemeal, and then anyway.
I think going to the moon is important, but I mean, there's a lot of resources there. Like, there's rare earths, and I think it's helium-3.
I mean, like, I think it's important, but we're on Antarctica. We don't need to be there either, but we're there. It's not easy to live there either. So, I mean, why? Yeah, I mean, we should go to the moon for research. We should build a base there.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
Spaceport. Yeah. Shipyards.
Yeah, put something on the dark side of the moon. Huge telescope. Anyway.
Alrighty. Yeah, dude. Well, I think that's good enough. So, thank you everybody for listening. Give us some feedback, and if you made it to the end of this, congratulations. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next one.
What year does man first set foot on Mars?
I think the soonest would be 29.
29.
Yes. And I don't think it's more than 2 to 4 years beyond that.
And that's not an unmanned. That's a human being putting his foot on the surface.
Yes, best case would be 29.
And what do you put the odds of finding either alien life or evidence of alien life?
I don't think we're going to find aliens.
Okay. But do we find ruins? Do we find remnants?
We may find the ruins of a long dead alien civilization. That's possible. And we may find subterranean microbial life. That's possible.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, mundus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.